All right, today we're going to talk about bluefin tuna jig selection. There's a lot of different kinds of jigs out there, different color patterns and sizes, shapes and weights and all of that stuff. So it can get a little overwhelming, and today we're going to kind of narrow it down so you got a good idea of what to go out there and get and be prepared with so that you can kind of fish all different types of conditions at different times of year. Bluefin tuna tend to bite jigs throughout the year, but one key aspect that I kind of see over and over again is they'll bite more often during the day in the springtime and early summer on jigs. But as the season transitions and the water warms and weather patterns change, they'll bite live bait more often than not later on in the year during the day, but they'll still bite the jigs during the night. So it's really important to understand that, again, the conditions and time of year that you're fishing so that you can make sure that you're going to maximize your time out there. So we'll start off talking about color. Color can mean something sometimes and not really make a difference other times. And by that, I mean, you're going to hear a lot about these different color patterns like this, like Katy Perry color, for instance. That one oftentimes can be the hot ticket on these Colt snipers. It's just blue and pink for whatever reason. The sun's out there, it's reflecting off of it. The fish are close enough to the surface to where they're actually going to be able to see it. And sometimes you'll see people getting bit on those more than others, even if it's the same style of jig. So it's good to have like a handful of different colors, and especially during springtime, figuring out what it is that they're biting on so that you can kind of match it. But during the nighttime, there's no sun out there. And oftentimes, you're going to get bit as long as the metal jig gets down in the zone in time. At that point, it's more important to make sure you've got a wide array of jigs in terms of weight, so from 200 gram all the way up to 500 gram, so you can get in that zone. One week they could be biting on 250 gram all night long, and it's getting down in the zone, and the current conditions are great, so it works out that way. But then the next time you go out, everything changes. Those 250 grams are scoping out, so you got to get a 500 gram to drop down there. So again, it's not just color, but oftentimes it's weight, especially at night. So case in point, a good buddy of mine actually took some pieces of rebar and weighed it out, went ahead and welded some rings on there and outfitted them with hooks, and was able to catch a 75-pound bluefin tuna in the middle of June in the middle of the night. Case in point number 2. Eddy bombs. Now this is a great example because these were literally just torpedo sinkers that somebody had rigged up with hooks, and again, no coloring, no googly eyes, none of that. They were catching them left and right, sometimes outperforming other more well-known jigs. So the color pattern there didn't really matter. It was mostly about getting in the zone. Shape didn't matter. It was about getting in the zone. Number 3, and this is a good one because there's a lot of different glow-in-the-dark jigs. This one was actually given to me by a Phoenix rep on a Phoenix sponsored trip. Time and time again, you'll see a deckhand or a captain pull you aside and say, hey, stop shining your flashlight on that thing. You're wasting time. The more time you're trying to get these things to glow is less time that jig's in the water. And at 500 feet down, the sun's not out, they're not seeing anything. They're more going off of a reaction bite. You just want to make sure that jig is in the water and in the zone. So, whether it's a glow-in-the-dark one or like this cool kind of Rasta colored one. This is a 400 gram rip roller that my daughter picked out. To me, it was the ugliest thing in the world, but it also has landed me some really good fish. And it was more about getting in the zone than anything else. So, when it comes to color selection, I think it's more important for the daytime bite, but at nighttime, it matters a lot less. What does matter though, and this is a side note, is making sure you have metered braid. So metered braid means the color on the braid changes every 50 or 100 feet. And so when the captain is saying, hey, we're seeing them down here at like 500 feet or 400 feet, you want to make sure you get down below the zone and be able to pull back up, not super far below the zone, but you're gonna have no idea how far your bait's falling if you're not metered or using a line counter. And line counters just really aren't practical on these sport boats here in Southern California at nighttime. I see people using them, but you want to just be able to get them down super fast and burn them up and just repeat. So if you got metered line, you're gonna be able to count 100, 200, 300, 400 feet. Okay, great, we're in the zone. Burn it back up, drop it over again, drop it over again, drop it over again. Just keep going that way with the metered line. If you don't have metered line, you really have no idea where you are. Another side note about line. So we talked about metered braid, but it is important, at least in my opinion, that you're putting a top shot of mono. Mono's got some stretch to it, and I think that oftentimes because the braid is really rigid, so is fluorocarbon, that stretch is going to be key in avoiding getting short bit. If you're putting on fluorocarbon, number one, if you're attaching that to mono and the mono's attached to your braid, that's just another failure point or potential failure point, because that's another knot that you're going to have to worry about. And in the middle of the night, I don't think it's going to matter very much whether it's fluorocarbon or mono. They're not going to see it either way. Fluorocarbon, has a lot of advantages, and I absolutely love it for fly lining and things like that. But for jigging, especially during at night, I wouldn't mess with it. I think we can go over the different kinds of jigs so that you're familiar with what they look like. And we'll start off with the rip roller. So like I mentioned earlier, this is a rip roller. This specific one is 400 grams, and they call it a rip roller because as it falls, it kind of rolls in a horizontal pattern. Now, is it going to get down into the zone as fast as some of these slimmer ones? Probably not, but will it sit there and rotate in the zone a little bit longer than the slimmer ones? Absolutely. These things are absolute magic sometimes, and I do really well with the rip roller, so it's always good to have a couple heavy ones in your arsenal. I would probably get 300, 400, and 500 gram ones, have at least a couple of each ready to roll for when you go out there. And they come in 200 all the way up to 500 gram sizes. The number two, we're going to talk about Shimano flat falls. So these butterfly jigs, the flat falls, they're kind of a teardrop shape. This one's not rigged up, and this one's actually not really for bluefin tuna. I like to have a bigger one. The biggest I think they make is 300 or 350 gram, but these were selling out like crazy a few years ago, and it was really hard to get, and they're widely available. I'm going to pause and say I don't think that Bluefin Tuna make a decision on the kind of jig they're going to bite each year. So again, going through all of these, it's important to understand what it is that you're looking at and then kind of match the conditions out there. Flat falls are fantastic, but at maximum they're 300 grams, and if you need a 500 gram, you're going to have to move to something else. So number three, we're going to talk about the Daiwa SKs. So kind of similar to the flat falls. It's a bit of a teardrop shape. They make these things upwards of 400, maybe 500 grams. These were also one of the big ones, a few years ago, and they were very hard to find, but they are readily available now. So these ones work absolutely fantastic. They make all the different color patterns you could possibly want. Always good to have a couple of those in your arsenal. So moving on, we've got the Eddy Bomb. This one's kind of a modified version. I'm not sure if this is an actual Eddy Bomb or some different kind of brand, but again, this is just a very thick weight. This has got some color to it and whatever, but this is kind of what they look like. Now, you're gonna notice that I've got the hooks on the bottom. One thing that I've noticed starting last year specifically is that sport boats were asking that you put hooks on one side or the other, but not both. And I think it's because when you're pulling up a big fish during a chaotic scenario where a lot of people are going bendo and the deckhand is trying to get this hook out and get it tagged and ready to go on to the next guy, when you've got other hooks kind of flailing around while the other side hook is hooked in there, accidents can happen. So whether you like top or bottom in terms of placement on these hooks, that's up to you. Some people will swear by having them just on the bottom or just having them on the top, but just be cognizant of that. And if you rig it with hooks on both the top and bottom, be prepared to take them off on certain sport boats. But again, that's the Eddy Bomb. Also works great. So knife jigs in general, these ones are a little bit slimmer. This one I believe is a Nomad, and this is a 200 gram. But this thing, because it's more kind of almost like aerodynamic and slim, a 200 gram one is going to get in the zone just as fast as a big kind of fatter 300 gram one oftentimes. So having a couple of those like kind of thinner knife jigs, again, this is one, I can't even tell you what brand this is, but they sells it good. They sell at good tackle shops. And so, oftentimes you can talk to the tackle shop people and say, is this off brand just as good as a Nomad or a Mustad or a Daiwa or whatever, and they'll shoot you straight. But knife jigs in general, it's always good to have a handful in different sizes. And sometimes these are all considered knife jigs, especially these rip rollers, but these have kind of less contours to them. They're flat on one side, curved on the other, so the action's going to be a little bit different. And sometimes different actions might make all the difference. Again, you're trying to kind of adapt to the conditions. And sometimes when some of these ones that I'm swearing by aren't working, you might want to try something else. So with that said, sometimes we go with the tried and true. This is a yo-yo jig. Looks very similar to a surface iron. This is a Salis 6X. I would definitely switch out the hardware on these for sure. But these are like I said, the tried and true. They've got a really cool action going down. Your bite more often than not is going to be as it's falling. But having a couple of those on hand are those have been used for decades, way more often than these other jigs that are actually made for rockfish that people are using for bluefin tuna, which is why you got to switch out the hardware on them. Let's see. And then last, we're going to talk about Colt snipers. So these, I always have almost every single size available. This is a knockoff version. Again, this is the Katy Perry with the glow in the dark on the side. This is not the Shimano one. I think this one's about 200 grams. But, these tend to get bit, especially at times when nothing else is going to get bit. I've caught everything from yellowfin tuna and yellowtail to calico bass and sheephead and all kinds of stuff. So having some Colt snipers on hand is always a great idea. Side note, if you can get on a sponsored trip by a tackle shop or a gear manufacturer, absolutely do it. They always have these kind of cool gift bags, and oftentimes it's actually really good stuff. Everything that they include is super usable for whatever you guys are fishing for. So the last part I want to talk about is that kind of FOMO factor on the IT jig. So every year it's something new. We talked about Eddie Bombs. Before that it was Daiwa SKs. Before that, it was the Shimano Flat Falls. Last year, it was tungsten jigs. Now, I try to avoid the FOMO. It's always good. I mean, they all work pretty much. It's not like the Bluefin Tuna, they'll make a decision at the beginning of the season on what size, shape of jig they're going to buy. I mean, or bite. They're going to hit them all more often than not. However, the tungsten ones, there's something interesting about those. So tungsten weighs more than the other materials that these jigs are made out of. So what that means is you can get a smaller tungsten jig that weighs more and can get down in the zone faster. And right now, all the bait receivers have are anchovies. There's very little sardines and mackerels. And what that kind of tells us is that when these bluefin tuna are up here in our backyard, if we're only seeing anchovies in the bait receivers, that's going to be what they're feeding off of. And the tungsten jigs are smaller. So they're going to actually mimic the smaller baits that these bluefin tuna are biting on. That could be a game changer for you. So they definitely tend to be more expensive. I think on the cheaper end, they're like $36 before you put hardware on there. But having one or two on a slow bite day, especially if they're biting off micro baits, that could be the game changer, like I said. So it's always good to kind of have one or two of each kind that you're seeing out there. And those tungsten jigs, just put a couple in your arsenal and be ready to use those. Overall, the advantage here is again understanding the currents, understanding the weather patterns, and being able to pivot and adapt accordingly. As you can see, there's a lot of different types of jigs to consider, and sometimes we don't have all the money in the world to be investing $1,000 in different types of jigs at once. So go into your local tackle shop, talk to the people there, find out if you've got enough to get 4 jigs. What 4 jigs are you getting? Ask the tackle shop people that, and they'll shoot you straight. For me, I'm getting a heavy one. I'm definitely getting a rip roller in the 400 to 500 gram range. I'm getting a Colt sniper, and I'll get a couple somewhere in the middle. I generally like to have 2 of each because they will get broken off, and you don't want to have a trip record because you kind of skimped out a little bit. You had one 500 gram jig and the current's kicking up pretty deep and so or pretty rough. And when you lose that jig, your trip's over. You might as well go to bed. Nah. Have a backup of each of them. And if that means that you start slow and just buy 1 or 2 at a time earlier on in the year, do it. Absolutely. And do not wait to the middle of the season. And here's why. There's going to be some hot ticket items out there, but the second that these bluefin tuna start biting and they show up in the fish counts, people are going to go stock up. And I've seen it every single year. You go into the tackle shops and they're kind of depleted. So if you start early, you're going to be able to build that arsenal up for the entire year. I did put a link in my bio to a lot of these different jigs that I use. If you're like me, you got kids and a job, it's kind of hard to get out to the tackle shops all the time. And especially if you're just getting started and stocking up, an easy way to go about that is to go online and buy them. Now, I do benefit if you buy them online for sure using these links. However, I always strongly encourage you, just go into the tackle shop if you can. Those guys are the experts. Those men and women are experts. They're going to be able to steer you right. And they're seeing it day in and day out. So they might have some insight that might not be available everywhere else or online. So go in there, talk to the tackle shop people or people at landings. But most importantly, just make sure that you're well stocked up now before things start selling out. Aside from that, I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you get that personal best this year or get your first. But make sure to share this with any friends you think might need it. Give me a comment if you think I could do something a little bit better or add anything to this. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like. Aside from that, have a great season and go get them.